All right, so it looks like we are live for our presentation today. This is the CSCU consolidation update to higher ed as a committee, but also the consolidation committee as well. The way we'll organize this is that President Sheng will have some opening remarks, so we'll move on to, is it Director Mike Rook or Interim President Mike Rook? I will have some remarks, and then we will spend, I think we have 2 hours allotted for this meeting. So happy to have anybody ask any and all questions at that point, because that is what the remainder of the time will be set aside for. So with that, my co-chair, Senator Slapp, do you have any comments before we begin?
No, I appreciate President Chang and staff and other distinguished guests from being here and giving us and our colleagues the opportunity to ask questions and have a dialogue with you. Especially, I know this is a very pivotal time for what you all are doing. So thanks again, and let's get to it.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Witkos, any comments before we begin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank everybody for in advance of your presentation today. This is certainly something that's been a long time coming, and looking forward to hearing the progress to date. Thank you.
And Representative Haynes, any comments from you before we begin?
Sure, just in the spirit of the Higher Education Committee, let's get going, but thank you for being here.
That sounds good to me. So with that, we will kick it off to you, President Sheng.
Thank you so much. So to the members of the committee, thank you for hosting us today. And my name is Terrence Chang. I'm president of the Connecticut State Colleges University System, and I'm joined by Interim CT State Community College President, Dr. Michael Rook, Interim Provost, Dr. Maya LaPierre Drager, CFO Carrie Kelly, Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Affairs, Dr. Allison Buckley, and last but certainly not least, Dr. Duncan Harris, CEO of Capital Community College. So you all know it's taken us about 4 years, more than that, to get to this point. And I can go on and on about how hard the hundreds of faculty, staff, administrators, and students across our system have worked, how dogged and determined and passionate and committed they've been to create Connecticut State Community College. But you know this already, because you all are leaders who have worked with amazing people throughout your careers, and you know what it takes to do big things. So indeed, big things are happening. Last week, this team met with our accrediting body, the New England Commission for Higher Education, otherwise known as NECHE, to review our proposal to merge the 12 individual community colleges into one singular institution, CT State Community College. And I'm happy to report that NECHE has approved our proposal, and we are slated to open the doors of CT State Community College in July of 2023. But for a moment, I will ask us to focus not on the what or the when, but to focus on the why. Why have we embarked on this journey and taken on this massive responsibility to change our community college structure? And the answer, to be blunt, is that our community colleges have been drastically underperforming in almost every measurable area for more than 10 years. As institutions of higher education, we hold ourselves accountable by a variety of metrics: graduation and retention rates, academic and student success indicators, and overall financial health. It is difficult to admit, but it must be said. Collectively, Connecticut's community colleges lag behind their peer institutions in every neighboring New England state, in almost every important category. As an immigrant, a first-generation student, and a person of color who has worked only in public higher education and predominantly with BIPOC students, the statistics that are most crushing to me are the ones that show that we're leaving behind our Black and brown students. Further, the community colleges are under incredible financial stress due to plummeting enrollment and the burden of sunken costs. Our current financial trajectory is unsustainable. So this is not what our students deserve, and this is not what the state of Connecticut deserves. CSCU and our community colleges are the engine of social mobility and workforce development for our state. The overwhelming majority of our students come from Connecticut and stay in Connecticut after graduation to work and live their lives. No other institution of higher education in our state can say that. So we have no choice but to change and do better, or we risk letting down our students and our communities and becoming obsolete. To not do something drastic, something bold and ambitious to try to meet this challenge and fix our problems would be a dereliction of duty, and we are not going to do that. We thank you all and the entire legislature for your continued support. We look forward to a vigorous discussion, and ultimately we hope that you will see what we see. Interim CT State President Dr. Michael Rook will now walk us through a brief presentation, and after that, we will be open to answering any of your questions. Dr. Rook.
Thank you, President Chang, and good afternoon, everybody. As President Chang indicated, I'm Michael Rook, serving in two roles: Interim President for Connecticut State Community College, and also as President of Northwestern Connecticut Community College in the Northwest corner. Hopefully everybody can see the slides that I have. Everyone see those?
Yes.
I will continue on. Okay, so I'm not going to repeat that these are the members of the team that we have today that President Chang has already introduced. What I would like to do is just provide a very brief overview of where we are currently. Many of us have worked on this merger since 2017 when we first began this work. And I'm just going to highlight a little bit on the substantive change proposal process that our accreditors require, the timeline that we're on, and the major accomplishments that we've achieved, and a little bit on the work still ahead. So as I mentioned, we first proposed this as an option in April 2017 to merge the 12 community colleges into a single accredited Connecticut State Community College. In order to do that, we have to achieve two important goals, one of which we just received last week. The first one is the approval of the substantive change proposal by our regional accrediting body, the New England Commission of Higher Education. And the second is approval by the U.S. Department of Education, which will allow us to award Title IV funds, which is, as you probably know, is what students use for Pell Grants in order to pay for college. And we've been working alongside both of those groups for the last 4 years, and we are well on track to achieve those goals. The formation of Connecticut State is a significant investment. We're adding, I believe the actual number is 158 additional guided pathway advisors at all 12 campuses to improve our student success. We've gone through a 3-year process of aligning our curriculum across all of the colleges. You can imagine, I think there was something like 600 different degrees and certificates that all had to go through an alignment process. It took hundreds of individuals, mostly faculty, that have done that work. And we will have a single student transcript that allows students to take classes at any campus. No more having to transfer credits from college to college. They would be able to access any course at any campus, any semester, and then transfer those credits onto the universities. The second important goal for the formation of Connecticut State was to strengthen our financial stability, and our CFO, Kerry, will be discussing that in a few minutes. But currently, we have 2 institutions amongst the 12 that have negative financial reserves. We need to restructure the staffing to account for our enrollment declines, and we need to structure shared services that invest heavily in enrollment, retention, and completion. And as I mentioned, the guided pathway advisors is a significant part of that. So for our accrediting body, the substantive change proposal is the mechanism they use to undertake a change of this size. So we formally submitted our proposal to the commission on February 11th, last month. We met with the commission last week and answered all of their questions, and basically worked alongside them for the last several years to get us to this point. And as I mentioned already, merging the Title IV applications under a single OPE-ID, which is the ID number students use to apply for financial aid. That process will begin in the next few weeks. And then progress updates. We've provided annual updates to the commission every year for the past 4 years. And we will be providing 3 additional reports over the next 15 months to keep them abreast of all of the progress that we still have to complete. Here is the implementation timeline that we're on. So starting in February of this year, they accepted our proposal in March. We will transition to Connecticut State from essentially now until June 2023. We will begin accepting students into Connecticut State this October. And July 1 of 2023, we will formally open our doors as Connecticut State Community College, once we receive the final approval from our accreditors and the U.S. Department of Education. Just to highlight some of our major accomplishments, as I mentioned already, we've aligned curriculum of 237 different degree and certificate programs, over 1,345 courses as of February. That number has gone up since then. We will have a single catalog that will be available to all of our students. Courses will be aligned, prerequisites will be the same, learning outcomes will be the same. And so students won't have to worry that if they take a class at Three Rivers that it won't transfer to another institution. We'll have common general education, common learning outcomes, and prerequisites. One of our strategic priorities for Connecticut State is diversity, equity, inclusion. We want to build an organization that reflects the student body that we serve. We have some work to do in that area, but we have developed some strategic partnerships with national entities to help us identify that and to make some changes in the way we do business. And as I mentioned already, our guided pathways investment of 158 additional advisors, which we're already starting to see bear fruit for the colleges that started that process sooner. Our enrollments are increasing, and our retention and completion numbers we expect over the next few years will show that that investment was a wise investment to make. I've mentioned some of these benefits of a single community college already, but let me just quickly go through them. Students will only have to apply once. They don't have to apply each time they want to take a class at a different campus. They will only have to fill out the FAFSA form one time. They'll be awarded one financial aid package that they can use at any community college site in the state. They will arrange once for high school transcripts, proof of immunization, college transcripts, and so on. That age package can be used across all of our locations. There'll be a single catalog that students will be able to access, common learning outcomes, common prerequisites, and an aligned statewide curriculum. I do want to mention that it does allow for some local flexibility. So our degree programs do allow for that. So there is a certain number of credits that each campus can vary depending on the needs of that local community. And so that's an important part of our curriculum alignment process. And the one thing we want to emphasize is that each of our colleges currently has unique programs that exist. So for example, the nuclear program at Three Rivers, the dental hygiene program at Tunxus Community College, and so on. Those unique programs will continue to exist. But one of the benefits of having a single institution is that students across the state will be able to access those courses, especially if those courses are online. We expect our student to advisor ratio to go from 750 students to 1, which is where it is roughly now, to about 250 to 1. So that's a significant improvement in our student to advisor ratio that allows for much closer cooperation between students and advisors. As you can probably imagine, most of our colleges already have food pantries, mental health services, and emergency financial support. We're going to bring some consistency to ensure that all of our campus locations have the same degree of services so that a student, no matter where they are in the state of Connecticut, can access the same degree of resources and services no matter where they are. A streamlined application, as I've already mentioned, consistent and equitable resources. That is not the case today, where campuses have different levels of service and resources based on the way that the budget has been developed over the last 20 years. We're trying to bring some level of consistency to that. And then equitable financial aid. Our financial instability is something that we cannot sustain. And so as President Cheng mentioned, this is the path that we will be on. 2 of our colleges have negative reserves, as I've mentioned already. Our historic enrollment declines, like most community colleges in the country, we've suffered from the pandemic, mostly attributable to the student population that we serve. They've been more susceptible to the pandemic than most. We've undergone a 34% enrollment decline since 2014. Our revenues have not kept pace with expenditures, and so that is going to be a key part of our change, and our high fixed costs. So Kerry, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to continue.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm Carrie Kelly. I'm the CFO for Connecticut State Community College. As Mike mentioned, we've experienced historic enrollment declines of 34% since 2014. And although the General Assembly has been very generous and increased our funding year over year, that level of funding does not keep pace with our expenditures. 70% of our revenue comes from state appropriations, and we cannot increase tuition without sacrificing our commitment to affordability and access. As Mike mentioned, our expenditures are high fixed costs. 84% of our expenses are for personnel in the form of wages and fringe benefits. We have high overhead and duplicated efforts across the colleges. On the next slide, you'll see our enrollment decline since 2014. So the blue bars on the left are actual enrollments. You can see between 2014 and the current year, FY22, how that has declined. It's 34%. If you look to the right, these are our projections for the upcoming year, FY23 through 28. The gray bars show our baseline forecast. This is what we expect if there were no action taken. And you can see it's got a generally negative outlook. So we have very conservative enrollment assumptions. The dark blue, navy blue bars show the impact of guided pathways. This is an enhancement to our enrollment and our revenue that happens by investing in guided pathways and increasing our student retention. And the light blue shows PACT. That red line shows what the baseline trend would be over the period. Next slide, please. So the merger and PACT have provided financial stability, and it improves our revenue by increasing our baseline. It improves our revenue by increasing our enrollment. As I mentioned, our baseline enrollment forecast is negative. We're improving our revenue picture by implementing PACT, the debt-free community college program, and implementing guided pathways at scale. We've been able to do this by using 3 years of federal funding, both from HEEAC institutional funds that were sent to colleges for pandemic relief, as well as the ARPA funds that we received from the state. We're reducing non-student facing costs by eliminating duplication of services, aligning staff with organizational needs, implementing shared services, and achieving economies of scale. You can see in the chart on the right, the dotted blue line shows what the impact of the merger and PACT are on our finances. And the gray line shows what would happen if we took no action. So you can see we have a period of negative net reserves through this period ending in FY28 positive. It would be far worse if we hadn't taken any action. The merger, next slide, the merger is an investment in fiscal solvency, and the savings exceed the costs. We have to acknowledge there are costs to implement the formation of Connecticut State. We've spent funds on faculty stipends for curriculum alignment. We've had a 3-year engagement with Achieving the Dream to promote equitable student success, and we've created the leadership team you see here today. We've compared what the administrative costs are versus the administrative savings. So you can see the costs of consolidation are reflected in the gray line, and the savings that we've achieved through strategic attrition management is in the blue line.
Thank you, Kerry. So just to wrap up our ongoing work, we still have about 15 months of work ahead of us to complete the merger, to implement our enrollment management strategies, to increase our traditional adult learner population, implement a shared governance structure that will operate statewide with faculty involvement in curriculum and governance across the organization. We will finalize our curriculum alignment this May, and all of those final curriculum proposals will go to the Board of Regents for approval by June of 2022, and then go into the catalog starting this fall. We'll finish a strategic plan for Connecticut State, establish our diversity, equity, inclusion plan, bring our One College banner system, which is our student information system, online starting this summer, and transition our current roles and responsibilities of all of our staff across the campuses, starting now and through July of 2023. So in summary, the merger will accomplish two central goals: improving equity and student success and improving the financial outlook for the college. All campuses will remain open. It's a very important component of our plan. We do not want to close any campuses. Despite unforeseeable events, financial projections have been accurate. Merger remains on track to deliver promised savings. Connecticut State Community College will remove artificial barriers to student success and access, and the choice between a vibrant future community college that better serves the students versus the status quo, which clearly is not succeeding for our students. Further information can be found on ct.edu/merger. There's a lot of detailed information there, and it's now my pleasure to stop sharing and to take questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, President. I have a couple quick questions. So the first question I have is just regarding enrollment. And I understand that our projections are fairly flat over the next, I want to say like 5 or 6 years, disregarding PACT and disregarding guided pathways. Obviously that 34% hit is huge, scary numbers. Why do we have our projection not going down farther? Because you said it was conservative. I'm concerned that maybe it's not conservative enough. And then as an additional question, I can understand why PACT could potentially have an impact on increased enrollment. At least I get what the argument would be, but why would guided pathways help with increased enrollment? It seems like that would help with student experience, but why would that change the number of students that would be in the system?
Allison, do you want to take those?
Sure, happy to. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Allison Buckley, and I am the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Affairs at Connecticut State Community College. So I'm happy to tackle the first question on our enrollment projections. The actual baseline projection that we have is a downward trend, which is reflecting both the demographic trough with traditional age students, high school students. It also captures the focus that the community colleges are placing on recruiting non-traditional age students, adult learners. We have a goal of increasing that population by 1 percentage point a year. Our graph does mirror what you see in other states and in New England. So I think we are in line. Certainly the baseline trend is in line with what other institutions are seeing in the region. Regarding guided pathways and how it impacts retention. So the guided pathways are really a portfolio of reforms that are designed to help students maintain momentum to meet their goals. I'll talk a little bit about the investment in guided pathways advising. As President Rook mentioned, we are switching the student to advisor ratio to be from its current 750 to 1 to 250 to 1. And so really the focus of this is every community college student in Connecticut has a person that when they have their unique barriers and challenges, there is someone who is mitigating that barrier for them on a one-to-one basis. And so that is, these are people who are reaching out. When a student says, I have a balance due, I don't know if I can afford college. Well, here, let me connect you. Have you filled out the FAFSA? Connecting them with tutoring and with those other those resources that we have in place so that they know that they are there and that they can persist. National research indicates that guided pathways does benefit retention. Our early indicators in the first colleges that are fully online. Our first institutions came online in the fall, and we've seen an increase in our fall to spring to retention of 6 to 8 percentage points, and we aren't even fully operational yet. I do want to also mention that part of some of the other reforms that we are looking at, guided pathways advising is the largest one we have underway, but we are also looking at best practices that we know support retention and success. So that could be accelerated terms. So instead of taking a class for 15 weeks over the whole 15-week term, we're chunking those classes into 7 weeks. You do 7-week classes, you get a break, and you do additional 7-week classes. We've also redesigned how we onboard students and make sure that they are ready to be successful. And it really is a very exciting time.
Dr. Harris, I see it looks like you might want to answer this as well. I do have some follow-up questions on this, but go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, I was going to add what this looks like at my campus. And so I had previously had 3 counselors and 2 grant-funded advisors. I now have a team of 13 guided pathways advisors, right? And whose job it is to know what's going on with my students. Once again, oftentimes when a student decides to stop out or drop out, it's not at 9 to 5, and so now I have somebody who knows what's going on. The student feels comfortable engaging and saying, hey, I'm thinking about stopping out, and then they're able to engage. Our fall to fall retention rate is 46%, so we're so the impact of those guided pathways advisors, if we go up 10 to 20 percentage point, which is reasonable, that's huge in terms of the bottom line. Oftentimes, student affairs professionals, advisors are seen as a cost center, right, and as an expense. In our model, we're really seeing their impact on our bottom line and revenue. And so now I don't have to go out and try to find and replace, that 54% of the students that weren't coming back. I have people on campus that are keeping them. Rather than going out and trying to find and recruit more students. So that piece is huge in terms of what we've never had in terms of a full-time dedicated staff of professionals to keep students in school.
Thank you, Doctor. So I think the point I'm trying to make is not so much whether or not these guided pathways advisors is good for our school system. I definitely believe that they are. My question is, looking at the graphs, when you take into account the additional bump that you're including for PACT students and for what guided pathways will do, is it almost looks like you get us to where we were at 2014. And I'm just worried that we are building in an assumption that is significantly rosier than is actually attainable, even when I completely agree that this is where our money should be going. I think guided pathways seems like a reasonable model, and it seems like it absolutely should help with retention. I just worry that our expectations aren't reasonable.
And we do evaluate the projection model every year. Certainly COVID was a very challenging event, and it rocked the models, but we do look and adjust and tweak every year. There are underlying assumptions in the baseline model, which is, are we capturing the students who stopped out during COVID, and are they returning? We call that our COVID bounce. So there are different components. I do want to come back to something that Dr. Harris said. I think we absolutely, our retention rates. So we are limited by the number of new students coming in Connecticut. So what we are pivoting in enrollment management is truly looking at retention, and we have tremendous ground to improve there. Our 2-year retention rate is the lowest in New England. And so if we are increasing the retention rates, I think that will also really support our enrollment goals. But we certainly, every spring starting at the end of the fall semester, and through those months, from November, December, January, February, a team of us will meet and we evaluate the model. How did we perform versus last year? And we adjust as we go, and we will continue to do that.
I'm just a big fan of expectation setting. That's why I'm focused on this. And I'm also, and tell me if this is wrong, but I think $25 million are set aside for these additional guided pathways advisors. Is this long-term budgetary, or is this one-off with federal money that we'll have to find a way to fill in those gaps in the future?
Hi, I'm happy to address that. So we are using a combination of HEEAC funding, institutional dollars that were provided by the federal government, as well as $19 million that was provided over 3 years by the General Assembly and the governor through ARPA. And in combination, this allows us to build the program at scale. And by FY25, it through increased retention, it will generate enough revenue to self-sustain thereafter. So that was an important component of this. As you mentioned before, Representative, enrollments have declined. So when we originally envisioned the program back in 2019, it was based around 2019 enrollment levels to achieve that 250 to 1 enrollment threshold. As we saw further enrollment declines, we reduced the number of guided pathway advisors we would need to hire initially to achieve that 250 to 1 ratio. So we have made modifications to the program, ensuring that it is self-sustaining, but we would expect that in the out years, as this program grows, we would reinvest in additional advisors. For folks who are following along at home in our NetSheet merger documents, you can see this schedule as Appendix AV, where we lay out all the financials and the hiring plan for guided pathways.
Well, with Representative Walker and Representative Haddad, Senator Austin on the call, I will leave most of those budgetary questions to them. So I will happily cede my time now over to Representative Scott, followed by Representative Cheeseman. Go right ahead.
Thanks, Chairman Elliott. Just a couple of quick questions. I'm fairly new to the higher ed committee, so please bear with me that some of these stats and some of these numbers might be readily available, and I just don't have access to them yet. So you talked about 34% drop in enrollment since 2014. What I'm curious to understand is, and based on the conversations in the presentation you made, it seemed like expenses have increased since 2014. I'd be wondering, what percentage increase are we seeing since 2014 in terms of expenses, right? I would be interested in the same kind of graph potentially, but also what about the state support? What has that gone up since 2014? What I'm really trying to understand is the cost per student. How much money are we spending per student when you're looking at it that way? Because obviously less enrollment, but increased in terms of expenses is going to make a fairly drastic increase to that. And I just want to understand what those numbers are so I can grasp my head around it. If anyone has those numbers, if not, we can pass it on after the meeting, but I'd appreciate to be able to see those.
Yeah, I don't have the cost per student at my fingertips. It is an interesting way to contextualize the story. But I think it's important that folks understand, the majority of our revenue does come from a state appropriation for both a block grant and the corresponding fringe benefits that accompany it. And, the state has consistently increased the level of support to the community colleges, despite the trend that we're seeing nationally, where many other states have had to disinvest as they consider that a discretionary part of the budget. And I'm proud that the state of Connecticut has continued to invest. So the amounts of support have increased. I think our challenge is that we have a structural mismatch, that our expenditures grow faster than our revenues. And part of that is our collective bargaining agreements and other inflationary increases. We have certain fixed costs that exist no matter what our student enrollment is. So our costs are not really scaled to our enrollment. There's a certain amount that exists just to keep the lights on, so to speak. But we're happy to take a look at it. We've drilled down and we've produced stuff on a per head, per capita analysis, and we'd be happy to forward that to the committee and share that.
I appreciate that, because the bullet point that caught my attention was 84% of expenses are for personnel, which are wages and fringe benefits, right? That I don't understand how it does not commiserate with the 34% decline, right? That if there was overhead in terms of buildings, yes, that building's not going to go away, right? But if you're talking about wages, if you're working with 34% less students, I have an issue with the fact that 84% of those expenses are for staffing that's going to help those students. So you have more staffing for less students. That's where I guess my issue is coming in. So I definitely look forward to those numbers and taking a look at that. So I appreciate you sending them through.
Yeah, happy to. And just to clarify one last point, there are parts of our staffing model that are scaled, particularly our adjunct faculty. But in terms of library and counseling and enrollment, that really isn't scaled to the overall amount of our enrollment. We would have expected with this enormous decline related to COVID that we would have a reduced reliance on our adjunct faculty. However, to achieve the class spacing that we needed to ensure that the classes weren't overcrowded, we had to offer more sections than we would have otherwise anticipated. And so we didn't see that drop off in our part-time faculty. So I think that's a small contributing factor, important to note.
If I might add, like all state agencies, we're undergoing significant attrition through retirements ahead of the CBAC retirement changes. And so, we're seeing, some reductions in staffing, and we're making very strategic decisions about which positions to refill and which positions to reduce. So that is also allowing us to adjust to that enrollment level.
I just want to add very quickly that, in terms of the lexicon that we're using, when we talk about staff and scalability of staff, we are talking about full-time faculty, full-time staff, as well as part-time faculty and part-time staff. Because of things like tenure, which I very much believe in, so I don't want that to be misconstrued, but we are not able to scale our teaching force in a way that is, as CFO Kelly described, in alignment with enrollment in a nimble way, the way other industries might. That just is not the way public higher education, we don't have that kind of flexibility.
All set, Representative. Representative Cheeseman, followed by Representative Ackert.
Thank you very much, Chairman Elliott. It's good to see you all here today. Thank you for coming with this presentation. So with regard to guided pathways, I see you anticipate hiring an additional 100+ advisors. Do you have, obviously you'd like to get these on board as soon as possible. I mean, do you have we need all these people in place by, July 2023? What's the goal here?
Yes, I'll jump in and I'll turn it over to Dr. Buckley. So we began that process of hiring those 158 advisors. My campus was one of the first, and we were fully staffed by, I think, July. And the other campuses that are coming, they're staffing up right now. And so we expect, I believe, by the summer, we will have just about everybody in place. Correct, Dr. Buckley?
That is correct. By the end of May is our target.
And how are so you enroll and you're automatically given a guided pathway advisor? Is that how it's working, or is it tied to which particular discipline you're looking at? How does this structure work?
So the guided pathways advisors are aligned with areas of study so that they can work closely with the faculty advisors. A very important point is these folks are not replacing faculty advising, they are augmenting it. So they align with areas of study. And so when new students enroll, they are assigned an advisor, but very importantly, all of our existing students, based on their areas of study, are also assigned an advisor.
Okay, and you mentioned that the adult learners, the non-traditional, the possibly returning for further education are an important part of this process. What are you doing, one, to attract these adult learners, and two, how are you structuring the curriculum in a way that it's going to make it easier for them to actually complete their certification or their course? Because, going to school in that 9 to 5 days a week may not work if you're, have a full-time job or something like that. So I'm curious as to what your steps going forward are.
I can start with the first question, and I don't know if our provost would like to jump in as well. But with attracting adult learners, we are working and very closely with our continuing education, our workforce boards, as the adult population are interested in education and retooling, making sure that we have smooth pathways for application and admissions to continue at a community college. So we are building those relationships. We are doing a great deal of work in community outreach and working with employers. And I don't know if Dr. Harris wants to chime in there as well, but as employers who are interested in supporting their workforce through education, we are building those relationships and partnerships to ensure smooth transition. Critically, we are looking at how we operate and make sure that we are student-ready institutions, and making sure that we are available to meet our students in a way that is convenient and fits into their life and other demands. As part of that, I mentioned we are looking at the accelerated term so that you can move taking 1 or 2 classes at a time, but still maintain a full-time status to persist and complete. And I can pause there because I think some of my colleagues will have information to weigh in as well.
Thank you, Allison. Yeah, I'm Dr. Maya LaPierre-Dreger. I'm the Interim Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs. It's nice to see everybody. So I'm going to start by just backing up just a second and talk a little bit more about guided pathways and put into context for you, for those of you who aren't as familiar with guided pathways. It's a continuum of supports. It's a methodology of bringing students into a path sooner, helping them understand from the very beginning of their experience in the higher ed system, what are they interested in? That way they're not getting into courses, taking things that they don't need, getting into a swirl and trying to figure out their life plan while wasting money, taking courses and using up their financial aid. So guided pathways is a continuum where that's getting them on the path sooner, helping them stay on the path throughout, which is increasing our retention, helping them to get to completion. And then where do they go next? Is it a career track? Is it a transfer track? What are the partnerships with employers? It's an entire experience for students. So I just want to make sure everybody's understanding it in that context, because it's not a single entity. It's not a single group of people. It's an entire methodology of coming at the educational experience of our students. And there's a lot of services and wraparound supports and holistic supports that are folded into that. In terms of the academic supports and how we're targeting the non-traditional students, there are quite a few strategies we're doing. One, by aligning the curriculum, we have curriculum opportunities that previously were only located in a single location. Now a student can come into any of the 12 campuses. They'll be able to say, you know, I'm interested in the nuclear engineering technology program down in Three Rivers, but I'm located in the northwestern part of the state. I want to do that program. How do I do it? They can start the courses where they are, knowing that they're going to have to go for their specialty courses down the road to get to that particular specialty area. But that student does not have to leave. They do not have to transfer their credits. They don't have to reapply to a new institution. And unfortunately, many of our students have experienced situations where they'll come to a particular college, they start, they realize a class they need is not available at their campus. Oh, it's available down the street at the next campus over. Let me go over there and take it and come back. They find out that they have to fill out an application, go to that campus, fill out the financial aid paperwork, transfer all their credits, and then they go to sign up for the class only to find out that the course that they're interested in has different prereqs at that campus than it did the campus where they started for the exact same course. This type of scenario is repeated over and over for our students, and we're solving that by turning into one college. Other strategies that we're using in terms of scheduling, we're doing nimble scheduling. We're doing session A, session B. So we have a 7-1-7 model where students can then select courses that, let's say they take the first half of a semester, an entry-level class, a second half of the semester, part B, or a second half of the semester in some other subject area. But it makes it so that they are accomplishing the same end result over the span of a semester, but now they're able to focus on a particular topic for a shorter period of time rather than splitting their efforts across their, all their subjects at once. We also have things like HECC. HECC is a structure where a class is offered for students who want to take it in person and for students who want to take it online simultaneously. So an instructor will teach the class where there are some students in front of them and there are some students at home, and they're having an interaction in real time. That's called HECC. It's a very new strategy that's been unveiled in the last few semesters. We also have things like traditional hybrid, where students have some days on campus, some days off. We have fully online. We have fully online asynchronous and fully online synchronous. We have traditional classes. We have classes days, nights, weekends, you name it. So the point is we have a lot of options out there, and we really try to create things that are flexible for our students to attract them in every area. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Harris, Duncan Harris, want to weigh in?
Yeah, and I'll be brief. I'll give you just a couple examples that tie into support for adult learners that have been deployed during the merger. And one is the Eversource example. And so Eversource reached out to Capital to develop a program to train line workers. And I think Senator McCrory was involved in that, and some others, got behind that. And we were able to stand up a program working with them, an 11-week program for an adult that's able to now move in and have an amazing job with Eversource, with benefits and opportunities to earn a wage to support themselves and their family. I have a meeting tomorrow that Norwalk will now be able to stand that up. So we'll do a portability. So in terms of the benefits of this system, where we're able to port programs quickly to stand them up. And so we'll be meeting with the folks in Norwalk who also have an interest in deploying that Eversource program down there. Another example of that is manufacturing. Capital had to jettison its manufacturing program in 2002 when we moved to our downtown location. So residents of Hartford haven't had a manufacturing program in Hartford proper for 2 decades, really. There was interest in standing up the program. We were able to work with colleagues from within our region to provide us with the curriculum. They also provided a director, Dr. Marissa Rivera from Asnuntuck, who came over to stand up the program. And now we're recruiting for our 3rd class of manufacturing students. And that's a 5-week program, right? So as you talk about adults, they may not always have 2 years in order to career change and things like that. And those are all examples of programs that have happened within the merger period. And I'm not sure, I've been in next week on March 26th, I'll be celebrating my 26th year working in Connecticut State Colleges and 22 at Manchester and the last 4 at Capital. And I'm not certain that those 2 examples would have happened the way that they have had we not been in this current structure where we're sharing, we're collaborating, not competing in the way in which unfortunately we used to during some of my early years in the system. And so those are just a few of the examples as we look at the needs of the adults and the residents of the state, where the nimbleness of our system is just a different animal than it was 4 years ago prior to us beginning the merger. And this is the 5th year that I've been working on standing up Connecticut State. And those are a few examples in terms of support for adult learners. And a lot of times we'll talk about the credit side, but there's a whole nother side tied to workforce that we're doing amazing work that's amplified and supported in the new structure as well.
Well, that's certainly reassuring, and I know everybody else has lots of questions. One quick question. I know President Chang touched on the tenure issue, and it's not simple as a downsizing. And I know you all were kind enough to meet with me and Senator Lopes, and the discussion. I know there's some, particularly in the engineering side, you desperately need to recruit professors because you've had a loss. On the other side, you may have a particular campus that has 30 English professors that are now. So how are you going to address some of that? Because you do have some very high demand areas. Do you think this merger is going to make it easier, more difficult to fill those positions where you really need those people to supply those in demand courses?
So I'll jump in terms of the curriculum. So we have faculty, let's take your example. Let's say we have a number of faculty that are in one location and the need is over in another part of the state. Well, one thing that COVID has taught us is the ability to be able to teach classes online, and it doesn't matter what geographic location you're in. So one of the things that has been very challenging for us prior to the merger is, let's say, for example, and by the way, just to give a little bit of background, I've been a faculty member and a member of the institution for over 23 years. I was an adjunct instructor for 6 years in many of our community colleges. I was a full-time faculty for 17 years at Capital. Many of those years I spent as program coordinator and department chair, and the last 4 years as a dean at Capital prior to this position. So I understand where our students and faculty are coming from, and I understand a lot of the challenges on the ground. And we had situations just like that where we said at Capital, we have students that are very interested in these high STEM programs and need calculus 2, other high-level math classes, high-level sciences, and we just didn't have enough seats to fill a section at Capital. So we would reach out to our sister institutions and say, can you please hold 5 seats in your Calc 2, Calc 3 class for our students? Now, on the surface, that might sound like a very easy thing to do, but putting that into place with the systems that were different between the individual colleges, with the cost sharing between the institutions, with just the technology alone, it would be hours upon hours of manual labor behind the scenes just to make it possible for 5 students from Capital to participate in a class with the other 25 students at Naugatuck Valley or another institution. But we made it happen. But in the future, we're going to have a situation where now we have a single system, a single database, a single catalog, a single course implementation schedule. And if I have 15 extra faculty in one part of the state, no problem. They can still teach those classes that are located online that are offered to any students across the state. Now, there are going to be some situations where you may have classes that are offered in person that you have to say, well, where is the need? Those are the kinds of conversations we will have to figure out and we'll have to discuss on a case-by-case basis as we go. Obviously, we have to work within the labor contracts that we have. We have to work within flexibility for students' needs. There's a lot of factors in there, but I guarantee you we will be working through those as effectively as possible.
If I can add to that, one of the benefits of the structure we're building is that we will be asking faculty, instead of working in silos across 12 campuses, we'll be asking faculty to form departments that are statewide. And so if you're a faculty member in manufacturing or any discipline, you will be meeting monthly, if not bi-weekly, with your colleagues across the state in that discipline area. And so the opportunities for curriculum development and cross-fertilization of new ideas and new programs should be substantial, as opposed to all of us working individually and sometimes at cross purposes. So I think that is a benefit of having statewide academic departments in the future structure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman Elliott. Thank you all for your answers.
Thank you, Representative. President Cheng, you do have your hand up. Is that intentional?
Yeah, I just wanted to add real quick in terms of what we're doing with adult lifelong continuing learners. I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago, but in the fall, we created partnerships with Amazon Web Services and Google to offer their full suites of certificates that are often stackable into degrees or on top of existing degrees. And those are enormously impactful in terms of working with non-traditional students. And I think that's really important. And we've also just recently created a partnership with Intel in terms of their AI curriculum as well. And so we are certainly looking to expand our value proposition beyond traditional age college students and into the adult and lifelong learning segment of the population, because that's what the state needs. And we want to be responsive to that as much as possible. And to Representative Cheeseman's question, which is an excellent question. It's a tough conversation to have, to be able to say that, things have changed, whether it's at a certain campus or in a certain region. And we have to talk about the balance of resources and especially in the faculty. But I think through open conversation and dialogue, we have to be transparent and honest. And we have to look at where, when, and how we're bringing the value for our students and for the state. And so I think through strategic attrition, through a real scrutiny of what lines we replace or don't replace, that doesn't mean we're going to cut. You've heard me say it before, I'll say it again and again. We're not going to cut our way to success, but maybe we can reallocate resources into those very specific areas that are going to fulfill the student needs and the state needs. And I think through that kind of cost reduction management, we'll be able to be successful. So thank you.
Thank you, President. All right, Representative Ackert, followed by Representative Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Dr. Chen and all your wonderful staff. I want to thank you for being here and providing this presentation. Full disclosure, I was a Board of Trustees prior to the Board of Regents member. And so I've heard the term bold move before, over a decade ago, and what we wanted to accomplish. So first question, does the new community college, state community college, still fall under the Board of Regents umbrella? Is that, we're keeping that, but now it's just, instead of 12 campuses, so to say, we have a system, community college. Is that correct?
Yes. So the way we're structured currently, Representative Ackett, is we have 17 institutions under the Board of Regents, right? The 12 community colleges, Charter Oak, and the 4 state universities. Once we complete this transition, we will have 6 institutions under the Board of Regents, right? A statewide community college, Charter Oak, and the 4 state universities. And so, that structure is changing, but the campuses will all remain as they are.
And that's what I had thought that the dialogue was going to be, that's what the structure was. When I look at all the charts and everything that you put out, there's really not a Board of Regents kind of focus in that, discussion. So I wanted to continue that thought that's what it was and where we went to, because that's still my reservation, is that we created a new system over a decade ago. Student loss started about a couple of years after that new structure. So, getting our students in / our customers of education, that's going to be a job that we all have to work on. Back when I was a trustee for the community colleges, we had record attendance, we had record enrollment, just massive. I don't know what the attraction was that. I think we had a pretty good system then. But Dr. Duncan, you brought up some good points about, how we're sharing, technologies. I think we did it in the past. It sounds like maybe in a way, just me listening to the community, what your discussion is, we may be more nimble. We may be able to do programs in different schools now. And I'm glad that Dr. Duncan brought that up about the Norwalk. I was at the event that took place at Eversource's training ground and the wonderful apprentices that they were putting on. So Dr. Duncan, thank you for you and your staff are doing a fantastic job with that and sharing it with the others. I appreciate that. So I'm going to listen to the dialogue a little bit further. I have some severe reservations because we did the bold move a decade ago. We're doing another bold move, but it sounds like there is some value. I think the number one thing we want to do is provide the best product that we can for our students. We've had the opportunity to add staff and guidance along the way to see that we're hearing at 750 to 1, and now we're going to be 250 to 1, but you're already making those moves. I'm glad to hear that our student attention to our students is first and foremost. We'll see what happens as we start to unroll this more. I'm going through your charts now as others are talking. So again, I thank you for the time. I'll still remember how much value I thought that we were done under the community college trustee system, and hopefully that this surpasses the expectations that we had back then. So I thank you for your time, and Mr. Chairman, as always, appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chen, and all your good staff.
Thank you, Representative. We'll move on now to Representative Walker, followed by Representative Haddad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for this presentation. There are a lot of questions, but I mean, some of them I really am very enthusiastic about. Number one, I do want to remind us that part of our reason why we have such a high cost in our higher education system is our legacy debt. And those were things that we did not have any choice in. Those were things relayed to us. And we have very systematically, especially it's been a major issue for us in appropriations. Senator Austin and I have been really putting as much money as possible in that to try and elevate it so that you guys don't have to have this burden. But it has been, I mean, that's where a lot of our expenses were really laid out. So it wasn't as if we had money that we're throwing away. We were paying off debt. So in listening to this, did you talk to the students? I'm sure you talked to the students to ask why they were not coming back or what their problem was. Was the number one issue guidance counseling? Was that the number one issue that you had?
No, I'll start and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Buckley. As I mentioned before, the pandemic disproportionately impacts community college students far more than other sectors of higher education because of the susceptible nature of our students, right? Many of our students are single parents, have multiple jobs, take care of family, and we're really impacted, as we all know, by the pandemic far more than more affluent students. So I think, I talk to students all the time, and I try to find out, obviously every student has their own story, but I think what we're seeing with the pandemic, especially male students, seem to be more impacted than female students. And, there's a lot of research going on to try and understand what cause of that is. But I think students have just had to take on more work and take on more jobs in order to make ends meet. And, sometimes it's a tough choice between going to class and finishing that degree or taking the job that pays the bills, right? And those are the really tough choices our students have to face every day. So, Dr. Buckley.
I would agree. And when I speak with students, and particularly, we're in the midst of calling every student who stopped out during the pandemic and asking them, what were the barriers? How can we help? Some of them, a great deal of them, are financial. I think we have also seen some students would prefer to be in a face-to-face environment, and they are waiting until we've returned to normal. And I think for some students who struggle to pursue their education, the pandemic has taken such a toll that they don't have any runway to absorb the stress and the shocks to their own environment in that way, and that they just need everything else to stabilize, and then they want to come back to it. So, I want to also underline, where we can, we've tried to be creative with the support of the federal government and the emergency relief. We launched a very significant initiative to use federal funds to pay off students' debts. So if you had a small debt, and if that was holding you back, that when you are ready to return, the pathway will be smooth.
Dr. Harris, I think wanted to add. Go ahead, Dr.
Yeah, and I'll be brief, Representative Walker. It's nice to see you again. Oftentimes it's financial is root, but when you unpack that, it could be a myriad of components, rolling to that. However, what I will say is that in our new configuration, we've been able to roll things out across all 12 that I'd imagine on our own we might not be able to do, right? So example of that is we now have a system called Timely Care, which we were able to roll out across all 12, which provides mental health counseling. It's via remote. So oftentimes there's individuals that may have been conditioned to not seek mental health are now utilizing this system. Capital has one of the highest rates of students using that platform, where once again that we wouldn't necessarily be able to afford on our own. So that's an example. We have an initiative with the Department of Housing where, and I'll give you, sometimes I try to avoid giving the one great story, but I will in this case. We had a nursing student. So we have an initiative with the Department of Housing where we can access short-term emergency stabilization funds for students. And I had a nursing student close to finishing. So she would have finished in the spring, but ran into a situation where she was going to be evicted. Based off of this partnership, which Capital is piloting for the entire Connecticut state. So we're already talking about this interagency work where we'll kind of, get it set up here and then roll it out. We were able to get her housing, which will, she will finish in May now, and then have access to this, amazing career as a nurse, following. Now, had we not had that program in place, Lord knows she would have done what I would have done, which is find another job, take care of my kids, move if I had to or whatever. And so once again, that's another example. And then the last one that I'll share is another initiative between our agency, and I have no qualms referring to us as an agency, but our entity and early childhood. And so, you know, working with Beth By, we've once again begun to cut into students who are, my average age is 28. Many of them have, you know, children and things like that, who have been forced to make decisions about quality, safe childcare and being in school and finishing degrees. And so once again, that's across all 12. It's not, you know, any one of us trying to engage the agency on our own, you know, and President Chang and his staff and Allison Pritchard, who's spearheading that, you know, was able to connect with Beth By and say, all right, well, what do we need to do? And how do we you know, find and secure the funds for it? So I just say that we're able to do things in a very different way than we were in the past in terms of advocacy, in terms of supporting our students. And it's just and once again, I've been around for a while. It's just a different way of us closing the gaps on our, you know, for our students, and equity and opportunity gaps.
Thank you for sharing that. The reason why I said the counselors, though, I agree with you thoroughly, especially about the childcare, because I work in an adult ed, and I'm transitioning my kids into, or my young adults or adults into your system. And part of it is they're in their 20s, they have children, they don't know how to balance the two. But the other part is counseling. They're all pretty much first person in their family going to college, trying to understand how do they navigate this system. And when you don't have anybody that you have as a familiar person to check. So I'm hoping that when I register with you to go to school, I not only get my schedule, but I get a name of a counselor who should be reaching out to me immediately so that I know I have Tony Walker to talk to when I need to know what are the things there, because those are the types of infrastructure things that need to happen. The other one that I think is concerning is the fact that you do hybrid, but you're assuming that a lot of these kids know how to study on a platform like that. That is also something very, very complex for a lot, especially urban kids, when that's not exactly the way that they've learned and it wasn't integrated into their system. We are doing that more and more, but you know, there's going to be a long step before we get to the point where it's an automatic comfort zone. So looking at how we introduce hybrid and making sure that the student is capable of doing a hybrid, capable of doing a distance learning class, because those types of things set them back. And that's really, really, that's scary, because we don't want them to come into a new system and immediately say, well, it doesn't work for me, even though we didn't take into account what their needs are. I like the idea of for the college system being available, and the articulation is, I'm assuming, getting better so that when they come into your system, they're not having to repeat the same courses over and over again that has happened in the past. So I think that is good, but the guided pathways, I'm going to need some more detail, not now, but I'd like to get some more detail about it. I'm just not sure, you know, it's got a high ticket price. And I want to say that Carrie and Ben tried to explain a lot of the financials there, and we support you all the way, but we got to make sure that it's supported in a way that's going to come directly to the students and things. And the last thing I will say is the fear that I've heard from so many people has been, when you have a merger, you have lost jobs. And I know Dr. Chang has been very clear about that, but that is the fear. How do I, as a professor or teacher currently, how do I fit into this system? And many of your people probably don't even know how to do hybrid classroom instruction. So I think there's an insecurity going on both parts, and I hope that we will be able to address all of those, because we don't want to lose the history that we get from the professors that have been there. But at the same time, we do have to provide it, because we may have a pandemic next year and we may have to go right back to hybrid learning. So thank you very much, and I look forward to getting a little bit more detail about guided pathways and the students. So thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Move on now to Representative Haddad, followed by Representative Turco.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the presentation. It's this has been a long conversation, as you know. And at times it's been fairly acrimonious. And so it has been a difficult conversation at times to have over time. But I appreciate the presentation today and the information that you're providing. And I have full confidence that I think that everybody on this call and everybody involved in this discussion really have the same outcomes in mind as we move forward. I will express one small frustration and then move on to more complimentary remarks. You know, when Carrie mentioned the funding sources for the student advisors and for guided pathways, I didn't hear administrative savings being invested into that project, and maybe that was just a small omission. But I'm going to make an inquiry about it, because you know, when I look at this plan, I see a lot of very positive aspects to what you were talking about today, and actually I have no reservations at all about investing in guided pathways and a better student to advisor ratio. I think is a good investment that will pay dividends, right? But I also don't see that as being contingent on the merger of 12 colleges into one. To me, that's a question of resources that have been provided from external sources to reach that goal. But maybe you can dissuade me of the notion that these two things are not connected. It seems to me that the Guided Pathways initiative could have occurred with 12 individual colleges. Am I wrong?
Yeah, let me begin. I think one of the core elements of the work that we've been doing for the past 5 years is to really understand how the 12 colleges operated. And I think it's safe to say, you know, I say this a lot, we did things 12 different ways. And, you know, in order to implement a guided pathways approach, we really had to take a hard look at the best practices of guided pathways advising and to develop a consistent process and a consistent approach to advising students. We were not doing that previously. Every college, you know, would approach things differently. We had different levels of staffing. And, you know, bluntly, we just didn't have enough advisors to provide the level of service that we will now have. So, you know, we're really trying to invest in the services that will provide the most bang for the buck, so to speak, for our students, and, you know, allow them to get from beginning to end, you know, in the shortest possible way, and save them from wasting their financial aid dollars, which, you know, frankly, students often, as was mentioned by, I think, Dr. Drager, students would take classes that they really didn't need sometimes because they were self-advising. They would take duplicate courses or courses that wouldn't transfer. And students ended up often, I think the average number of credits was 80 plus credits for a 60 credit degree program. That's a huge waste of financial resources, both for the student and the taxpayer. And so, you know, I think that will pay off in many, many different ways over the next several years. And I think I look forward to being able to come back and update you on how that went.
And, you know, just to jump in, Representative Haddad, you know, we wanted to portray the investment in guided pathways and align our revenue source, which is federal funds, with our expenditures. But, you know, we have experienced significant savings through strategic attrition management from 2019 to the present, and we anticipate it into the future. And so although those savings are fungible to the bottom line, I mean, one could compare it to the overall cost. I mean, it's a matter of how you want to frame it, but certainly we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the significant savings that have already been achieved because of our plan for the future.
I certainly appreciate it. The first time we started examining the issue of the number of school counselors at each school, you know, many of us in the legislature and the higher education committee were, you know, similarly struck by the differences between campuses. Again, because different campuses were making radically different choices about how to expend the funds that were provided to them and that they could achieve through tuition dollars. And so I applaud the idea that we're going to have a consistent set of services across 12 campuses. I am a little bit, I'm just saying I'm more skeptical about the notion that this is what the only way to achieve that goal, but nonetheless, it is the way apparently that we will achieve the goal. And I want to also say that I do see real value in having students be able to be registered as a single college with 12 campuses and be able to take courses where they want. I also think that that probably was achievable through other mechanisms, but see that as an advantage of this plan as well. But where I want to go from here, though, I guess, is just to have a quick conversation about how do we measure success or not with this merger. And it seems to me that we're at an inflection point, and we have a unique opportunity to identify, what simple measures of success are, so that we can have this conversation in 2 years to know whether or not we've achieved certain goals or not. And to me, the question really is less about the bottom line of in terms of fiscal health for the university or for the colleges, or the number of staffs or the student ratios. To me, it should be based on enrollment, on persistence, and on degree completion. And so I'm hoping that, I don't know if any of those 3 factors were listed specifically in your application to NECHI. I know it's the underlying sort of motivation for a lot of the changes that we're making here, but I was hoping maybe today or in the near future, you could enunciate for us clearly what are our goals over a 2-year horizon or a 5-year horizon for improvements in those 3 areas: enrollment, persistence, and degree completion, so that future legislators, future committees can have this conversation and we can assess whether or not those outcomes, which are really the things that we're looking for more than anything else, have been achieved.
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Drager. I mean, our accrediting body is very outcomes focused, and one of their 9 standards is standard 8, which is educational effectiveness. And so they will hold us extremely accountable, as I'm sure you all will, to ensure that we are meeting those outcomes. We have, I can't recall the number of key performance indicator measurements that we follow across the board. Every semester we look at those numbers to see, are we moving the needle? And, all of those key performance indicators relate to the student experience. How many credits are students achieving on average? How quickly did they get through college level English and math? How many students don't succeed in their first semester in college, right? So all of these key performance indicators are really our scorecard that we keep to hold ourselves accountable, and I think you all will hold us accountable to those as well. Dr. Drager.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And Representative Haddad, these are great questions, and I'm glad that you're bringing them up. And I think it's really important to go back to, and I want to kind of revisit what you were mentioning in terms of the guided pathways, and also some of the comments that Representative Walker had said as well. Again, the guided pathways model is more than just counselors. It's more than just advising. It's a way of approaching things. And when a student shows up to the college and they say, I'm interested in fill in the blank, it's now a very different landscape. Previously, they would have 12 different colleges with 12 different catalogs, 12 different sets of prereqs, 12 different general education core curriculum requirements, 12 different graduation requirements. It was an absolute nightmare for advisors to figure out, let alone students to figure out what's best for my student, what's best for my future. Transfer articulations to our 4-year universities was very difficult to do because it was different for every school. Even our TAP, our flagship TAP alignment program, inside of that TAP, what may not be realized is that every one of the 12 institutions has a different, what's called a section B, without getting into too much detail here, but there wasn't agreement on the TAP alignment for the core education. So there was a little asterisk put into the middle of the TAP program to allow each campus to still have some uniqueness in that section B. So there could be up to 6 credits of difference between every student's experience, even in the aligned TAP program. So those types of things are now aligned in a way that's very clear. It's very helpful to the student. It's very nimble, that a student doesn't have to try to unpack that. And quite frankly, the advisors and counselors don't have to try to unpack that. So I just want to keep emphasizing this is probably the best dollar spent in higher ed in Connecticut in decades, is funding this guided pathways approach, because it's not just, and I hate to use that word just because it's significant. It's not just the fleet of amazing advisors that have been brought on board, but it's an entire methodology of how we're approaching things. And so I also want to just point out, we used to have in our 12 campuses, we had over 600 degrees, over 300 certificates, and over 4,000 courses that when faculty have gotten together over the past 3 years and done thousands of hours of work, and I'm talking thousands of hours, just in one semester last fall, we went back and kind of added up the hours that the formal hours of curriculum alignment work, and it was somewhere close to 2,400 hours in one semester that faculty had done to align work. That has gotten down to, we estimate it's going to be about 289 programs, degrees and certificate programs, and about 1,300 courses for students to choose from, while still preserving the uniqueness on each campus. So I just want to say that all of these strategies are just exciting. They're phenomenal. I told you, I've been an educator in the system for 23 years, in every level of the experience in all different areas of the state. And this is the most exciting thing. You know, I left a tenured full-time faculty position to go into a management role that many of you would understand is not necessarily all that glamorous or glorious, and it's kind of a slog at times, but it's because we believe in this work. This is the most exciting and innovative thing that we've done in decades, and I, for one, am thrilled to be a part of this. So I just say that because, you know, we might look like a bunch of folks setting policy and making rules, but our passions and our life work is behind this. We really believe in this. And there are a lot of people, I recognize that there's a lot of people that are really concerned and have raised very valid points, sometimes very, very loudly. And those are very helpful pieces of information to take into consideration. But the scales are, in my opinion, tipped far stronger in the other side. And there are far more benefits than there are negatives in this path forward. So I'll stop there.
You know, I appreciate your answers and the passion which you bring to this work. I think this is glamorous work. So I think I don't know what you're talking about if you think it's not. But I would like in the near future, if you could sort of provide to members of this subcommittee and to me particularly, you know, an idea about what those outcomes will look like at certain horizons. I'm not going to be overly prescriptive about what that should look like, but I am interested in being able to have this conversation down the road and sort of being able to judge whether or not we are in fact achieving improvement in the outcomes that we're seeing. So that would be helpful to me, I think, and I think it's a constructive way of continuing to have a conversation about what ultimately what we all agree on as outcomes. And so I appreciate your work, and that's the end of my questions. I'll thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to say a couple of things.
Thank you, Representative. Move on now to Representative Turco, followed by Representative Farrar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's really good to see everyone. Thank you for this presentation today and the update. And there are a lot of exciting things that I think are happening. I've been a big supporter of the Guided Pathways initiative, so I'm excited to see that is going forward. A couple of questions, and if you've answered them previously today already to somebody else, I apologize. But in speaking to retention, which I know has been an issue, and with the pandemic has worsened, have you seen any difference between the students enrolled in the PACT program that are full-time, that are not going to incur any debt, and their retention rates versus other full-time students that don't qualify for PACT or part-time or anything like that? So that's one question. And then the second question, I have heard some, and like you mentioned, there's been some criticism with the consolidation, and some of it certainly valid, that you're taking under consideration and helping to improve the whole process. But something as late as yesterday in the Higher Education Committee we heard during public hearing was that there's been, through attrition or whatever other means, there has been a reduction of student-facing employees on the individual community college campuses and a increase in more administrative, non-student facing positions. And, this is somewhat concerning to hear on the surface level, and that would be great to have a little bit more explanation if that is accurate, and if so, why that might be the case. So thank you for taking some time to address these questions today.
Yeah, I'll begin and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. So let me take your first question, Representative Turco. So the data nationally, we've looked at very carefully. Full-time students, there's a significant difference. I don't have the data in front of me, but there's a significant difference in the likelihood of a student even persisting from one semester to another if they're full-time versus they're part-time. I would imagine it's probably 3-to-1 ratio in terms of their likelihood of continuing. Our part-time students are always the most vulnerable, and the ones with the biggest challenges ahead of them, accessing their courses. So the PAC program, which I'm a huge supporter of, and I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of the legislature for supporting that program, because I think over time it's going to make a tremendous difference to the state of Connecticut. By encouraging students to become full-time, which we're seeing that occur in order to get the PAC funding, those students, will complete those degree programs in a much more rapid rate, and they will persist much more significantly. And that time to degree will significantly decrease. Part-time students, I'd love to see us find a way to support those students more with the part-time students, because they are, as I say, the most vulnerable population. And so I really would like us to consider investing in that. And so I'm very happy that conversation is ongoing. Do any of my colleagues want to add to that before I jump to the second question?
I could jump in real quick. And I don't know if Representative Turco spoke with my IR director prior to that question, but she actually just sent me something earlier this week. And for the fall cohort of PAC students, fall to spring retention. And I don't have as many PAC students as some of the other campuses, but I had 74 students fall to spring. 76% of them were retained. For non-PAC students, the retention rate was 61%. So there's a 15% difference in terms of PAC students. Fall to fall, there was 59 students, 61% retention rate, fall to fall. So that's that 1 year rate. For non-PAC students, it was 40%. So 20%. So PAC is making, would suggest that it's making significant difference. But those were rates for our fall 20 cohort of PAC students. Just some real-time data.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Harris. If I might, I'll tackle your second question. And I think, this is something we're looking at closely. So the question, I think, was, is there been a reduction in student-facing employees? And as I mentioned before, I think the vast majority of that, to the extent that that's true, and I don't know that it's as significant as maybe it's been portrayed, we're seeing a significant attrition of our state employees, just like all state agencies. We expected this, over the last several years. We knew that this spring semester, employees that are eligible to retire are likely to take up that opportunity, and they have to do so before June 1st, 2022. So we're seeing a significant loss of some very long-standing employees. And, we are, as rapidly as we can, refilling those positions on a very strategic basis so that we're ensuring the positions get filled in roles that exist in the future structure, and transitioning people as quickly as we can to that structure. Will that have an impact on our short-term student-facing number of employees? Absolutely, because it takes several months to refill a position. So that's what I would see, and I think that is a real issue, but it really has nothing to do with the merger. That's just simply relation to the fact that the state employee benefits are shifting at this point in the history of this merger. So I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that.
I mean, just real quick, I went from 5 FTE and counseling and advising to 13. So I'm not sure where you're getting your information, but I know that at Capital, that I had to find offices for our guided pathways advisors. We've never had that. And so, in terms of student facing, who meets with students all day in their Outlook schedules, I have more support to do that work at Capital than I have in 4 years. Student facing, keeping students in school. And these are advisors that look like my students. It's a very diverse group of hires that we've had with concordant relationships. And, so at Capital, I have more staff doing that work than I have since I've been here.
Yeah, and I'll just add, for my campus in the Northwest corner, we've gone from 3 academic advisors to 8, right? Which, a small campus, that's a significant improvement in our ability to serve students. So I would generally not agree with that assessment overall, but certainly we have lost some people to retirement this spring.
I appreciate that feedback. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me the questions.
Okay, Representative. We'll move on now to Representative Farrar, followed by Co-Chair Senator Slapp.
Thanks, Chairman Elliott. Thanks, everyone. And similar to Representative Turco, apologies in advance if you already covered this, but grateful to jump on with you all. Actually, and also following up with Representative Turco, I did have a couple questions around the guided pathways advisors. I've heard a few notes, both you as presidents just noted that you both have had an increase in the advisors recently. Are the guided pathway advisors seeing an increase on all campuses right now, or is that a later rollout? Can you give a sense of that?
Yes. So 3 colleges of the 12 went first, including the campus that I'm at in Northwest Connecticut. The other one's been Middlesex Community College and Housatonic Community College. So 1 in each of our 3 regions was selected to go first. Their guided pathway advisors were hired, I believe, by around July of last summer. And all of the other 9 colleges are nearing the end of that hiring process and should have everyone on board, I think, by June. Is that correct, Dr. Buckley?
So the second wave completed hiring by the end of December, and then the last 5 colleges will have all their advisors in place by May.
Okay, super. And so from the standpoint of you all noting this kind of new model for student engagement, am I right to assume that students will be matched as those hires come on and as you kind of staff up? Is that accurate?
Yes, the advisors are aligned to areas of study, and students will be assigned advisors based on their academic goals.
Okay, great. And then understandably, because you're going to have this whole new kind of cohort of staff who are engaged in advising, I'm curious how you're thinking about really leveraging what they're learning from their students to impact strategies that the campus or the system should take on. For instance, I'm thinking about the range of barriers that President Harris was noting earlier around transportation and childcare. I'm curious how you're thinking about gathering that information so it can be used effectively, not just by the system, but potentially for us as policymakers.
That's a wonderful question. And one of the key components is really forming a feedback loop. So we are asking the advisors they meet on their campuses and within their region of colleges to identify the needs and the common themes, which then are brought through our leadership team meetings to other areas of enrollment management and student affairs so that the financial aid office is aware, the registrar, the admissions office, and also to the leadership of Connecticut State so that we can take real action.
That's good to hear. And I would just say, I think at any future meeting, if you're willing to share, some of the feedback that you're getting, especially as you all are ramping up, I think that would be just very helpful, as was kind of added to about, outcome measures, just kind of understanding how this investment is working from that standpoint would be helpful.
We would be happy to. We are also surveying all of our students on their satisfaction every year, so we can baseline and measure how we are improving, and we would be happy to share that data as well. And the two, sort of one more qualitative, one a little more quantitative, I think gives a robust picture.
Great. That actually was my next question about students. So glad to hear that will be in the mix. I think finally, I know was noted earlier, way earlier in the presentation about the 30%, 34% drop off in enrollment. Connecticut is not alone in that. I just would like to hear, from you all broadly, obviously there are so many factors at play that go into that enrollment drop. But what are the strategies that you're taking on in this moment, and that, you're trying to seek out to improve such a large dip? It would just be helpful to understand where you're kind of looking to go based on that.
I can give the brief answer. I would be happy to provide more details. So we have a statewide enrollment management plan that really has 5 large strategic goals. One is about maintaining our market share for traditional age students, because although that is a declining market, we still really have to make sure that we are available as a low-cost alternative for the traditional age students in Connecticut. We are strategically focused on growing the adult learner population by 1 percentage point a year is our goal. We have specific goals regarding retention. We have tremendous ground to improve there, and it's more economical to keep the students you have through completion than to find new ones when that's a shrinking segment. We also have real goals about investing in professional development for our professional staff. If we are going to be a world-class institution, we need to make sure that our world-class staff have the tools they need to be successful. And then we have a 5th goal centered on compliance, because of our ability to participate without reservation in the federal programs is fundamental to our existence.
Representative, you are muted.
Thanks, Representative Elliott. I was actually referring to you. I said Representative Elliott earlier, I think referenced that there was assumptions kind of built in to the presentation around enrollment. So with the 34% decline that you've seen, what are the projections you all are looking at for the next few years?
And now, Dr.
Dr. Buckley's.
Sorry. So our enrollment projections have 3 components. The first is a base year model, which is if things do not change. We have enrollment projections around PACT and the new students around PACT. I'm just flipping to my notes. And then we have projections on retention. So our baseline enrollment drops slightly as we go out, but we are projecting 1,422 new students from PACT and an increase of in FTE, and then an increase of 1,139 FTE in retention, and then each year they change and migrate. But we could share that detailed information, and I think Carrie Kelly may also be able to give a specific citation of where it is in our NETCHI documents.
Yeah, just feel free to send it as an addition and to note where it is in the accreditation stuff. That would be very helpful. Thank you, Chairman, for the time.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Slapp, followed by Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Representative Elliott. Yeah, good to see everybody. A lot of my nitty-gritty questions have been answered, so that's the benefit of waiting a little bit. But I do have a question, kind of a larger picture question for President Chang. And it's really about winning the hearts and minds of faculty and staff. And I haven't seen, any official poll or anything. And I do appreciate that in the 6-hour public hearing that we had just the other day, and previous public hearings, that oftentimes the people who spend the time to submit testimony are the ones who are, feel strongest about it, right? And that people don't spend 3 hours waiting to testify to say, I'm pleased with how things are going. We get that as elected officials. I understand that dynamic. That said, we did hear from a lot of students and faculty and staff about, concerns about, and these aren't new to you, and I'm going to recite, right, in terms of erosion of, remedial education, creating this bureaucratic maze, the 5th largest community college in the nation, that they feel, not listened to, that they're fearful of a loss of culture at each of the schools. And I've been listening and hearing the some of these issues, many of them, right, have been addressed kind of piece by piece, and the homogenization of, in terms of academics, right? That's another concern. And again, these are not new to you, but I guess my question, President Chang, is what can you and your team do? And maybe, are there tangible things, right, to, again, win the hearts and minds and to come together? Because there's going to be, it's going to be a tough road. And we know there are a lot of people who are, have real concerns. And so, assuming that this does go forward, what's the strategy? Because it's not, I think you're going to have some challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Slapp. And you're 100% right. And, even though, as you said, folks don't wait around for hours to give their 3 minutes or what have you of public testimony, they do it because they care. They do it because, they don't feel heard, or they feel that they're trying to right a wrong. And so the first thing I want to say is that we take all of that input very seriously, and we have taken it very seriously since the beginning. And so you'll see on the merger website that there is essentially an addressing of concerns that have been, stated publicly to NECHE, and they are very similar to the concerns that you all have heard. And so we've done, through the accreditation process, a very thorough job of trying to address them. We have, informally and officially in public meetings and private meetings, tried to address as many of these concerns with as many folks as possible. But that said, we haven't always done a great job. I think we have to be very honest about that. And I don't think that's not to criticize anyone on the team. The team has worked incredibly hard, but I think if we went back and we did it from the beginning, there would certainly be times where we would have communicated more efficiently and more effectively and been more kind of inclusive in the process. So we certainly recognize and take responsibility for what we need to, because we want to try to right those wrongs. So as you all might know, I visited every campus, all 12 community college campuses. In the fall, I heard many of these concerns directly addressed to me. And I'll just say that we took many of the comments, because it wasn't just me, it was several folks on the team who went to each campus, and we listened, we took a lot of notes, and we went back and we did make changes. And so the org charts that you will see in the merger web pages, those reflect direct changes that came from input that were submitted to our group and also came directly to me through the tour. That would address certain things related to campus identity, campus nimbleness, flexibility, and the ability to maintain the community and community college. So I don't want to go on and on there. So your question, which is what's the plan moving forward? I think, again, we have to be better. We have to continue to work to be very transparent, to be very inclusive. I believe Dr. Drager might have some statistics in terms of the inclusivity of the process, because I think that's something we haven't done a good job talking about, is that this process has been very inclusive and has involved hundreds of faculty and staff. And it's something we just haven't, been very public with for some reason, and we need to. But what I would say is that I will personally continue to reach out and try to engage as many folks as possible to try to come up with solutions, right? To have real proaction in our engagement so that we have partnerships to try to fix things. When we talk about how we handle certain parts of the curriculum, how we support students, it goes back to some of my opening remarks, which is, why are we doing this? We want to fix problems. And so I said in a board meeting remark, I think we all have to own where we are right now. Faculty, staff, students, administrators, everyone in the system has to own that, because we've seen the demographic cliff coming, right? We've seen our enrollment falling. We've seen our budgetary and financial situation getting worse and worse each year, and we haven't taken that action. And so now we've run out of road. We have to be able to come together. And so I invite all those folks who are unhappy to continue the conversations with me and the team directly, but we have to start figuring out a path forward. But our door is always going to be open. We're not always going to have pleasant conversations, and we have to figure out as many mechanisms as possible to hear folks and to be inclusive. I will be frank, it is at times disappointing to know that there are, sectors of these constituencies that we have had engagements with, and we have tried to explicate the situation, and we have invited them to be collaborative partners to try to fix problems on behalf of the students. And yet we continue to hear the same complaints as if our conversations and our efforts in the past have never happened. And so I'm human, and we're all human, and so I will admit frustration with that, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop, because that's our job, and we'll continue to do that.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you,
I'll,
President Chen. Go ahead.
if I may, thank you. I'll just add to what Dr. Cheng had said in terms of the faculty participation and some of the concrete strategies that we're doing in the short term. So as you know, or perhaps you don't, but I would think you might, that our creditors have announced support for us moving forward with this merger. And that information was just announced this past week. And so after that announcement was made, one of the things that we're doing right away is we're starting a series of workshops. First is actually coming up in a few weeks on the 22nd of March, where every week for 6 weeks, there'll be workshops. In this case, they'll be academic related, where they're specialty topics. We're doing deeper dives into various aspects of what the new structure is going to look like, what that means, what changes are happening, what changes aren't happening, to try to help ease those concerns. So there are 6 workshops related to academic affairs issues, but there are a number of other types of topic areas across the institution that will be added to those workshop rollouts in the coming weeks and months. In addition, I would just like to say, and I know President Cheng just mentioned some stats, it's really important to note that there has been a considerable amount of, in particular, faculty involvement in the work. It doesn't mean it's always supportive involvement, but that's not necessarily a negative. We need both sides of every dialogue to better understand our weaknesses and our challenge so that we can have a stronger product in the end. And a couple of quick stats for you. In our submission documentation for the NETCHE accreditation in the appendices, there's a list that we were asked to prepare documenting all of the individuals that participated in various workshops and committees to help stand up Connecticut State. And there were 25 different work groups that since 2018 had been formed, with about 1,400 duplicated individuals and about 715, roughly, I think it was 713 individuals unduplicated. Those were members of those committees and work groups. And of that group, 49% of that membership was full-time faculty. So 49% of that membership was faculty on those groups. And not only that, but 34% of our entire full-time faculty body across the institution, across the 12, were members of those groups. If you drill down even deeper into the curriculum alignment work, this is where an astounding 47% of our full-time faculty engaged in that curriculum alignment work in some way or another. It doesn't necessarily mean their engagement was in support of a particular document. It might have been critical, and in many cases, it was helpful critical information where there are weaknesses and flaws. But that information was taken back. Just if you look at our governance process, there were 9 pages of feedback that were included in the model, in the documentation for the policy that was just recently approved for the new governance structure, where faculty feedback across, faculty and staff, but I'm focusing on faculty feedback across the system was included. In our aligned program review committee, what we call our APRC, there were 87 pages of feedback that was provided to those alignment groups. I think it was something like 1,900 some odd comments of feedback from individuals. And that alignment work was done entirely by faculty. So I just say that to say that some of the narrative has been that faculty are not engaged, but that's just not true. This has been an inclusive process. And I think that there's a lot of folks that have been engaged kind of quietly and under the radar because they didn't want to get perhaps negative pressure from peers about their engagement. But I think we're turning a corner and we're moving into a new area that I'm hoping that folks will sort of set aside their differences, start to row together towards a common goal, and really focus on the really amazing good work ahead of us. So I'll stop there, but thank you.
And if I may add, Senator Slapp, an important element going forward over the next year or two will be building the governance structure of the new college. That governance structure, very much like the body that you all represent, gives faculty and staff a meaningful voice and input into all of the processes and changes that go through the college. It's an important element of Standard 3 of our accreditors that we have shared governance bodies. We will have a statewide curriculum body that will review all curriculum, and it will be heavily membership of faculty. And then we have a statewide Senate with representatives from all campuses who will review policies and procedures and provide recommendations. Those are 2 bodies that have never existed before. And those are in addition to the 12 campus local governance bodies that will continue to exist. So I would argue that we will have more opportunities for dialogue. And you know, we've been so focused on building the structure. Now we're at the point where we can actually build those governance bodies and really get that input. So I think that's an important part of the healing process, in my opinion.
Thanks for your answer. I appreciate it. I'll yield to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Haskell, you're up. And as a reminder, we are done at 4 o'clock today, which leaves us about 6 more minutes. So go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep it super brief because I've learned a ton from this conversation. I think it's been a really thoughtful back and forth. And I wanted to say thank you for your comments about PACT, and thank you for your work to implement it and get these students onto campus. Just a very quick follow-up question about PACT and its future. I know we only have a few minutes, so if you'd prefer to follow up offline, that's fine, but it can be as short as 15 or 30 seconds. Should we, in the future, as a state, consider expanding PACT to non-degree granting programs? It currently, I believe, does not allow for students who are pursuing an apprenticeship, for example, to participate. And I wonder if that's a shortcoming of the bill as originally passed.
I think I'm going to take a stab at that and then ask my colleagues to weigh in. I think one of the challenges with non-degree students is that they're not eligible for Pell under the FAFSA program. And so, one of the benefits of the PACT program is that it really goes after those last dollar, right? So we ask the federal government to pay first. And if the federal government is not providing those dollars, then the state does. We're not able to do that under federal regulations for non-degree students, but Dr. Buckley may want to add to that.
I think you said it really well, Mike. I think I would like us to look at creative ways to financially support the non-credit students, and particularly for students who are in non-credit programs that are leading to workforce credentials. I think we may want to think about a different framework for that support.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, thank you so much for your thoughtful and also succinct answers. Thank you, Mr. Chair, just in time.
You got it. I have one question, and this may not be, well, do your best with it, but I'm looking for data on Housatonic and trying to see how guided pathways did there. And I know we have to take an average of what all the different universities do. Do we have that sort of granular information? Do we know that this program works as a rule across the board, or is it just on average?
I can share that at Housatonic, their fall to spring retention increased 8 percentage points. And this was their first year with the Guided Pathways Advisors. And as Dr. Dreger says, that is one tool in the toolbox of a number of reforms, but that was 8 percentage points this year compared to last year.
Okay. Well, it's 3:57. We have 3 more minutes. I'll see if anybody else has any other questions, but I'm not seeing any. And so I'm happy to give those 3 minutes back to everybody. So this was great. Thank you all for coming in. And